They took my multi-tool first, like that was the dangerous thing. The guard who took it had 4 arms, gray skin the texture of old concrete, and breath that could strip varnish off steel. He dropped the multi-tool into a clear bin without looking at me. I watched it land. The small scratch on the handle caught the light from the overhead strip. That tool had been in my work belt for 6 years. It had unseized 3 pressure valves on the Ganymede station and pulled me through a tunnel collapse on the Kuiper contract. It was the most dependable thing I owned. The guard moved on to the next item on his list. I looked at the floor. The floor of the intake barge was aluminum alloy grating, riveted in a crosshatch pattern with fasteners spaced every 8 inches. Standard industrial construction, except the fasteners on the left side of the main corridor were spaced 9 inches apart. Not 8, 9. 1 inch does not sound like much. Under load, 1 inch becomes a crack becomes a gap becomes a failure nobody sees coming until the whole section drops. I filed it. The intake line moved forward. 12 of us, all human, all collected from the mining outpost near Europa when the Veth Corps ships arrived without warning. The word on their processing documents was collecting, like we were rock samples, like we had interesting mineral content. I had been 3 weeks from finishing a structural contract on the outpost. I had a return ticket and a bag of duty-free chocolate and a very clear plan for how the rest of my year was going to go. None of those plans included alien captivity. The Veth Corps intake desk was staffed by an officer shorter than me, which surprised me. Wide shoulders, 4 eyes in a flat row across his face, a translation collar clipped to the table between us. The collar had a 2-second delay. Every word arrived 2 beats after his mouth moved, which made the whole intake process feel like a film with bad audio sync. He scanned my identification chip. He ran what I assumed was a physiological assessment. He typed for a long time. Combat classification, he finally said. Tier 0, unweaponizable. You took my multi-tool, I said. He typed something the collar chose not to translate. Relevant combat training, he asked. I can calculate the exact pressure required to collapse a load-bearing column, I said. Does that count? It did not count. They assigned me to a cell block on the barge's lower deck, a long corridor of individual cells with transparent polymer walls. My cell was 3 meters by 4. I checked the fastener spacing on all 4 walls first. Consistent 8-inch intervals on every side. I checked the ceiling. 1 ventilation slot, 20 centimeters wide, positioned 6 inches left of center. That off-center placement meant the load was not distributing evenly across the ceiling panel. Not immediately relevant. I filed it anyway. I always file things that seem irrelevant. Most engineering disasters start with something that seemed irrelevant. My neighbor to the left was not human. The size of a large working dog, 6 limbs, scales the color of rusted iron. In its resting posture, 4 of its 6 limbs were planted against the floor in a geometry that distributed its body weight evenly, the same pattern as a structural load bracket in deep-bore mining casing. I called it Bracket. Bracket watched me examine my cell for 2 hours without moving. It watched me press my palm flat against the floor grating and hold still for 30 seconds at a time. It watched me trace the seam lines of the polymer walls with my thumbnail testing resistance. On the 2nd hour, with no expression I could read, it tapped its own wall once. I tapped back. By the 4th hour, we had something that was not quite language and not quite not language. I would tap a sequence. It would tap a variation. I would confirm or correct. The same method I had used with drilling crews during radio blackouts on the Kuiper contract. Pattern recognition, call and response, repetition until the meaning locked in. Bracket learned faster than most of the engineers I had worked with. We spent 2 full days mapping the barge together, not with eyes, with our hands, our feet, the nerve endings that pick up vibration through solid surfaces. Every time a cargo lift ran, the The frequency traveled through the floor grating in a way that told me which deck it was on. Every time a pressure door sealed, the echo told me how thick the walls were in that section. I started to understand the barge's weight distribution the way you understand a building you have worked in for years. Not by looking at it, but by feeling how it holds itself together. The barge had the 9-inch fastener problem in 4 other sections. On the 3rd day, a guard delivered food. I did not eat. I was listening to the barge settle. 2 cells down, a human woman named Claire had been captured 6 weeks earlier. She had picked up enough of the Veth trade language to fill in the gaps. She told me what the Veth Corps were, what they ran. 17 combat arenas across 3 star systems, broadcasting to an audience she estimated at 12 billion. Fighters were rated by tier based on physiology, weapon compatibility, and combat history. Tier 1 was the top. Tier 0 was the entry level for beings the Veth had not yet bothered to classify. Tier 0 matches, Claire said, were not expected to last long. Most fighters did not come back from their first. "What is the arena floor made of?" I asked. Claire looked at me through the polymer wall for a long moment. "I am serious," I said. She had no idea. The guard who came to collect me on the 4th morning was built like a piece of heavy machinery. Armor plating on the shoulders, 4 arms, a voice like a compactor. He handed me a standard gray prisoner uniform and told me my match was in 6 hours. No weapon would be issued. Tier 0 fighters entered without equipment. He stated this without any particular feeling, the way someone recites a policy they have recited many times. I asked him one question before he left. The caller translated his response as laughter. "What is the arena floor made of?" I repeated. "Keth composite," he said. "Very elegant material. The audience enjoys the light effect under the broadcast lamps." I thought about that for the full 6 hours. Keth composite, a mineral resin hybrid, translucent under high-intensity lighting, used across Veth arena installations because it looks spectacular on a broadcast feed. Back in deep space mining operations, we had a near-identical compound. A crystalline silicate with a similar resin binder. We used it for bore casing components in environments where the pressure tolerances were tightly controlled. We did not use it for floors. The reason was not complicated. Crystalline silicate compounds have a resonance frequency. When that frequency is matched by an external vibration source and sustained long enough, the crystalline matrix begins to fracture from the inside. Not dramatically. Not all at once. The cracks start small, internal, invisible to the eye. Then the floor drops. In the cell, with 2 hours remaining, I pressed my palm flat against the floor grating and held it there. The barge's engine sent a steady pulse up through the metal. I breathed with it. I thought about Danny. My brother had worked a steel mill floor in Gary, Indiana from the age of 19. He died at 22 when a floor section gave way under machinery it was never rated to hold. The rating paperwork had errors, small ones, the kind that looked like nothing until they were everything. The foreman called it an accident. I had spent every year since calling it a design flaw. I became an engineer so that floors would not lie to me, so that I would always know what a surface was made of and what it could actually hold and exactly where it would give way when it finally decided to. I stood up. I straightened my uniform. I looked at the ventilation slot in the ceiling, still 6 inches left of center, and I thought about resonance frequencies and load distribution. Danny used to say, "Every floor tells you how it wants to break." He learned it the hard way. I was going to use it differently. The arena was louder than I had prepared for. Not louder than I expected. I had expected noise. But the Veth Arena crowd produced something that was less sound and more pressure. It came through the tunnel walls while I waited behind the gate, steady and building, the way ground vibration builds before a structural failure. It pressed against my ears and my chest and the back of my teeth simultaneously. I filed the frequency, potentially useful. The gate opened. I walked out. The grand reveal apparently was me. A human woman, 5 feet 4 inches tall, wearing prison gray, with no weapon of any kind. Walking onto a translucent floor under broadcast lighting in front of approximately 40,000 spectators from species I had never seen before. The crowd made a sound I had no word for. The translation collar rendered it as something between amusement and anticipation. The floor was everything the guard had described. Under the broadcast lights, the Keth composite panels glowed the way expensive glass does. Pale gold at the edges, deeper amber toward the center, with internal striations that scattered the light in every direction. It was extraordinary in the way that well-engineered things are extraordinary when you understand what they are made of. I gave myself 30 seconds to stand there. I was not admiring it. I was listening. The vibration moved up through the soles of my feet in a pattern that was almost familiar. I had spent 2 days learning the barge's resonance signatures. Keth composite sang at a different frequency than aluminum alloy grating, but the principle was the same. Everything has a pitch. Everything has a frequency where it starts to disagree with itself. I stepped left, the vibration shifted. I stepped forward 3 paces, it shifted again. There was a node approximately 8 meters from the northwest gate, a convergence point where the resonance of the floor panels intersected with the vibration from the arena's structural supports below. At that node, the Keth composite was under slightly more stress than the surrounding area. Not much. Not enough for the Veth engineers to have flagged it. Enough for me. I filed the location. The opposing gate opened on the north side. My opponent was a Dreshval. The translation collar listed the species data in a flat tone. Average body mass 400 kilograms, 4 upper limbs capable of independent strike actions, 43 previous arena matches, 43 wins. The Dreshval that walked onto the floor was 8 feet tall and moved with the unhurried confidence of something that had never once encountered a problem it could not end through direct force. It looked at me. The crowd noise shifted in a way the collar rendered as laughter. The Dreshval did not take a combat stance. It began walking toward me the way a person walks to a task they find slightly boring. I ran. Not away from it, not directly. I ran a specific pattern. Left 20 degrees 5 steps, right 30 degrees 8 steps, back angled 12 steps, forward 10 degrees 6 steps. I was not running in panic. I was running a geometry, hitting the same resonance nodes over and over in a sequence, each footfall landing at a precise point, each impact sending a hairline vibration into the crystalline matrix below. The crowd settled on a response, the collar rendered as mockery. The Veth commentators, audible through the arena speakers, described me as the Tier 0 human who had elected a survival strategy of sustained retreat. This was not a compliment. The Dreshval picked up its pace. I kept running my geometry. By the 3rd minute, the floor was talking to me, not in words, in the way pressure feedback changes underfoot when a crystalline matrix begins to microfracture from the inside. Subtle. Most people would not have felt it. I had spent 6 years pressing my palms and feet against stressed surfaces, learning what the feedback meant before the failure became visible. The floor was beginning to disagree with itself. Not enough, not yet. The Dreshval cornered me against the southwest boundary line on the 4th minute. It positioned itself between me and the open floor, 4 arms spread, weight forward on its 2 front limbs. The crowd responded to the cornering the way crowds respond to the moment before a conclusion. I was standing 2 steps from the resonance node. I looked at the Dreshval. I looked at the floor beneath its front 2 feet. I stomped 1 foot, full body weight, heel first, directly onto the primary fracture node I had been building since the 1st minute. The Keth composite panel beneath the Dreshval's forward limbs dropped 6 inches. Not a collapse, a controlled subsidence. The section gave way along the fracture lines I had been feeding it and settled 6 inches lower than the surrounding floor, small enough that an audience watching from the stands would barely register it. The Dresch valve registered it. 400 kilograms pitched forward at roughly 40 degrees. Its front limbs went out from under it as the floor disappeared. The recovery reflex of a being that had never lost its footing in 43 matches was a fraction of a second too slow. I was already moving. The fractured edge of the dropped panel created a 4-inch lip above the surrounding floor. I used it as a ramp, driving off it with my full weight behind my shoulder, rotating at the hip the way I had been taught during emergency response drills. My shoulder connected with the base of the Dresch valve's neck at the joint where the upper limb met the torso. The Dresch valve went down face first onto the arena floor. 400 kilograms plus my own body weight, concentrated through one shoulder, into one joint, with the added momentum of a 40-degree forward pitch already in motion. The sound of it hitting the floor was something I had not prepared for. The crowd had not prepared for it either. The arena went silent. Not the kind of silence that comes from boredom. The kind of silence that follows something 40,000 beings did not see coming. The kind of silence I recognized from structural failure assessments. The moment after the crack, before anyone has processed what they just heard. I stepped back. My hands were shaking. I looked at my palms. Danny's hands used to shake after a long shift, not from weakness, from what the body processes after it has been asked to hold something heavy for a long time. I closed my fists. The Dresch valve was alive and moving. It was going to recover in approximately 10 seconds, and when it did it would be significantly less interested in taking its time. I looked at the floor. 3 more exploitable nodes in the panel grid. I had mapped them in the second minute. I started moving toward the nearest one. The crowd found its voice. The sound it made was different this time. The collar offered no clean translation. The closest approximation it could produce was, "We did not expect this, and we are not sure what we are watching, but we cannot look away." I understood that feeling. I had felt it the first time a floor told me where it wanted to break. The Dresch valve recovered faster than I expected for something that had just hit the ground at that angle and weight. It turned toward me with the kind of focus that had ended 43 previous matches and came forward with no hesitation. I ran my geometry again. This time the fracture network was already there. I just needed the Dresch valve standing on the right section at the right moment. 4 minutes later, the match ended. The Dresch valve was on the floor for the second time. This time it stayed there. I stood in the center of the arena with a Keth composite floor beneath my feet that had 3 subsided sections in a pattern any structural engineer would recognize as deliberate. The broadcast lights caught the fractured edges and scattered them across the walls in fragments. The crowd made a sound that bypassed the collar entirely. I looked at my hands. The shaking had stopped. That night bracket tapped the wall. Our pattern I tapped back. They replaced my combat classification in the official records before midnight. They also ordered a full replacement of the arena floor panels. I took both as fair responses to what had happened. Claire tapped the wall later, slowly, 1 letter at a time in a tapping code that was just barely English. "How did you know?" I thought about how to answer that for a long time. "Every floor tells you," I tapped back. She did not respond for several hours. "Then teach me." I taught Claire first. Not in the arena, in the cell block through the polymer wall, using the tapping code she had developed during 6 weeks of captivity. I taught her how to read vibration feedback through her feet, how to identify resonance nodes in unfamiliar materials, how to walk a surface like it was a conversation, because it was. Claire was a cargo logistics coordinator, No engineering background. She understood the concepts faster than I had expected. "You are not teaching me to fight," she said on the second day of lessons. "No," I said. "You are teaching me to read." "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "What do I do with that in a match?" "Every floor has a failure point," I said. "Your job is to find it before your opponent does. Then you decide how to use it." Claire was scheduled for her first match in 8 days. I spent 7 of those days teaching her everything I knew about Keth composite, load distribution, and the relationship between an opponent's body weight and the force it concentrates through their feet at any given moment. On the 8th day, she went into the arena. She came back. She tapped the wall once when she returned, our confirmation signal. That was all. I did not ask for more. Some things do not need explaining. My second match came 12 days after the first. The Veth had replaced the Keth composite panels in the main arena with a reinforced version, double thickness, titanium mesh underlayer. I registered that the moment I stepped onto the new surface. The vibration feedback was denser. The resonance frequency had shifted. Not eliminated, shifted. Every material has a frequency where it starts to disagree with itself. Doubling the thickness does not remove that frequency. It changes the number. I spent the first 3 minutes of the second match recalibrating. My opponent was a Grelin. 6 legs in 2 rows, a natural echolocation system, 11 consecutive arena wins against opponents who were faster and stronger than me. The arena that day was a secondary venue, smaller, with a different floor construction. A titanium mesh system over a polymer substrate. The mesh surface had a characteristic acoustic property. It rang. Not loudly, not audibly to most species, but in the lower frequency range where echolocation systems operate, that mesh was broadcasting the position and movement of everything on it in real time. The Grelin was fighting on a floor that was announcing itself to its own senses with every step. I thought about that. The arena also had a ventilation system, large ducted fans in the ceiling, cycling air on a timed interval. The fans ran at a frequency I could feel through the floor, the same frequency the titanium mesh rang at. When the ventilation cycle peaked, every 90 seconds, for approximately 15 seconds, the floor vibrated at a frequency that would saturate a Grelin's echolocation system completely, like shining a light directly into someone's eyes. Everything would look identical for 15 seconds. I watched the ventilation cycle twice before I moved. Then I moved. The match lasted 11 minutes. It ended when the Grelin, disoriented during the 3rd ventilation peak, made a positional error I had been building the conditions for since the 4th minute. I walked out. The crowd response was different from the first match. No laughter when I entered. Something else. A focused quality to the attention, the kind you feel when a room decides something might actually be worth watching. My third match was on a different station entirely. A facility I had never seen, with a floor I had never stood on, in an arena that held approximately 60,000 spectators. The floor there was a liquid-suspended polymer platform, hard composite surface, but the entire platform was mounted on fluid-filled compression chambers below, which allowed the floor to flex under heavy impacts. The guard who escorted me described the anchor cables that held it in place. Braided carbon fiber, 3 centimeters in diameter, connecting at 4 corners, running through the fluid chambers to fixed points on the station's framework. I looked at the cable attachment points during the pre-match walk. Bolts countersunk into the platform edge, 2 inches of exposed bolt head above the surface. I looked at the distance between the bolt heads and the wall boundary. I looked at the geometry of the compression chambers below. I thought about lever systems. The match lasted 11 seconds. I was not proud of 11 seconds in the way I might have once been. I was proud of the geometry. Getting it right on the first attempt against an unfamiliar floor, with no rehearsal, meant the principles were transferable. That mattered more than the result. Back in the cell block, the teaching continued. I was not building a fighting team. I want to be precise about that. A fighting team has a strategy, a formation, a shared objective in a single engagement. I was teaching people to see the room they were already in. A fighter wins their match. An engineer changes the conditions before the match begins. There is a difference, and it matters. By the time my fourth match was scheduled, Claire had taken everything I taught her and built a curriculum of her own. Simpler than mine, more practical, stripped of the engineering theory and focused entirely on what to do with your feet and hands in the first 2 minutes of an unfamiliar environment. She could teach a being with no technical background to read a floor in 2 sessions. Claire was a better teacher than me. I told her this. She said, "You gave me the facts. I figured out how to make them useful to people who do not think the way you do." I thought about that for a long time. 2 cells down from Brackett was a bipedal being I called Pen, thin and quiet in the way of something that had been listening very carefully to its environment for a very long time. Pen communicated through rapid tactile patterns against any nearby surface, faster than my tapping code, with a precision I had to study for a full day before I could follow it. Pen had a sensitivity to vibration that was not trained. It was biological. Within 3 days of learning the basic principles, Pen was finding resonance nodes in surfaces I had to spend 10 minutes mapping. On the 4th day, it found one I had missed entirely. I sat with that. I had the engineering degree, 6 years of deep space structural work, and Pen, having understood the concept for 72 hours, was outperforming me in the application. Pen had not been trained. It had been paying attention its whole life. My 4th match came and went. My 5th, my 7th, each arena was different. Different materials, different construction, different structural history. Each floor had its own voice, its own frequency, its own failure point waiting to be found. I found all of them. After the 7th match, the VETH broadcast records showed something that had not happened in the arena system in over 100 years. A Tier 0 entry fighter with 7 wins, no losses, no weapons, against opponents classified between Tier 2 and Tier 4. The VETH gave me a name in their broadcast system. The translation collar rendered it as the Floor Eater. I did not correct them. Walking back from the shower facility after the 7th match, I passed through the main connector corridor. Aluminum alloy grating, same crosshatch pattern as the intake barge. I looked at the left side. 9-inch fastener spacing. Still wrong. Still a design flaw that looked like nothing until it was everything. I stopped walking for 3 seconds. The guard behind me told me to move. I moved. Still wrong, I thought. Danny died on a floor like that. I kept walking. The VETH Arena director's name rendered phonetically through the collar as Soren. He was the oldest being I had encountered since my capture. Old in the way that power makes things old. Not with weakness, but with density, like a material that has been under pressure long enough to simply become harder than everything around it. He met me in a room designed to suggest that both parties were equal in it. The table between us was Keth composite, translucent amber, internal striations catching the light. I found the resonance node in the table's surface before he finished his opening sentence. Old habit. He told me I was the most watched fighter in the current broadcast cycle across all 17 arenas. He told me my audience response metrics were breaking records that had stood for 120 years. He told me the VETH Corps were prepared to offer a voluntary fighter contract. Better quarters, a payment structure, freedom of movement within the station. He slid the contract across the table. I did not touch it. What is the grand arena floor made of? I asked. He did not answer immediately. He studied me in the way I had started to recognize as the Veth equivalent of recalibrating. "You would be asking that regardless of my offer," he said. "Yes," I said. "Then you have already decided not to sign." "Tell me about the grand arena floor," I said, "and I will tell you if I have decided." He told me. Reinforced Keth composite, 3 times the standard panel thickness, with a full titanium lattice substrate bonded to the underside. The surface had been redesigned after my 7th match. The Veth engineering team had identified the resonance exploit and restructured the crystalline matrix to eliminate it. They had, he said, made the floor structurally optimal. He said this with confidence. I did not tell him what I thought about that. I did not sign the contract. He told me what happened to fighters who declined voluntary status. I was familiar with it. Lower-tier assignments, higher difficulty match pairings, reduced recovery time. I understood that he intended to schedule me for the grand arena against the Veth. The Veth was the Veth fighting program's apex product, selectively bred and trained across 40 generations specifically for the arena. It had never lost. Its physiological profile had been broadcast advertised as the most combat-capable entity in 3-star systems. The Veth had been building toward a single climactic broadcast event, and they had decided, based on my 7 matches, that I was the opponent who would generate the largest possible audience. I was not flattered. I was thinking about a building that was, according to public Veth architectural records I had been piecing together from cell block broadcasts, over 300 years old. I told the arena director I would fight. He looked at me with what the caller rendered as surprise and satisfaction arriving at the same moment. I asked for one additional thing. The architectural schematics of the grand arena, I said. Standard intake documentation. I want to know the dimensions of the space before I fight in it. He considered this. It was a reasonable request. Fighters were routinely given dimensional and structural data about venues as part of the pre-match briefing process. He agreed. I had the schematics by that evening. I spent 12 hours reading them. The grand arena was, in the Veth system, what a cathedral is to the people who built it, a structure that expressed belief through its dimensions. The main fighting floor was 200 meters in diameter, circular, surrounded by tiered spectator seating rising 30 meters on all sides. Capacity, 400,000. The building had been constructed in phases over 3 centuries. The core structure was original masonry from the founding period of the Veth broadcast empire. The seating tiers had been expanded twice, in the 1st and 2nd centuries of operation. The floor had been replaced 7 times. The current floor was the most recent replacement. Installed 18 months ago, designed specifically to eliminate the exploits I had used in previous matches. The building that held the floor was 316 years old. I looked at the northeastern corner of the structural diagram for a long time. The northeastern sector had been the site of the first seating tier expansion, 200 years ago. The expansion had added approximately 45,000 spectator seats and transferred a significant additional load to the corner support columns in that sector. The columns had been reinforced at the time with a secondary casing, standard practice for the era. The secondary casing material was listed as a stone-equivalent compound. A compound that, according to spectral analysis data I had accumulated through Claire's translation work, had the same crystalline silicate base structure as Keth composite. 200 years of load bearing. 200 years of crowd vibration from 400,000 spectators, dozens of times per year, generating sustained low-frequency resonance that travels through building materials the way water travels through limestone. Slowly, invisibly, until the cavity opens. I found 3 microfractures in the northeastern column casing in the schematics. They were listed in the maintenance log as monitored but stable. Monitored but stable meant they had been measured and found acceptable. Acceptable and stable are not the same thing under load. I closed the schematics. I thought about the crowd. 400,000 spectators watching the most anticipated match in VETH broadcast history. Crowds do not just watch. Crowds respond. Crowds stamp and shift and generate rhythmic vibration at predictable frequencies when they are excited. I had watched them do it in every arena I had fought in. The floor was always talking to me. But so was the building around it. I had a way to make the building louder. The night before the grand arena match, Claire tapped the wall. I told her the plan. She was quiet for a long time. "You are not fighting the VETH," she said. "No," I said. "You are fighting the building." "Yes." Another silence. "What if it does not work?" "Every floor tells you how it wants to break," I said. "I have been listening to that building for 12 hours. It has been trying to tell someone for 200 years. She did not respond for a while. Then she tapped the wall once. That meant I understand. The grand arena entrance tunnel was the longest I had walked, 200 meters from the holding gate to the floor, with the crowd noise building the entire way. I walked it with my eyes on the grating and my feet reading the vibration like text. The gate opened. 400,000. The noise was a physical event. The collar rendered the crowd response as maximum broadcast anticipation. I registered the frequency, filed it, and stepped onto the floor. The new panels were everything the arena director had described. Under the broadcast lights they were extraordinary. 3 times the standard thickness, the titanium lattice visible as a fine dark grid beneath the amber translucence. Structurally, they were the best floor the VETH had ever built. I stood in the center and breathed. The floor gave me nothing. Not because there was nothing to give. There is always something to give. But the floor had been so thoroughly optimized that its natural frequency had been pushed out of the range I had learned to read. I looked at the walls. I looked at the northeastern corner. I looked at the seating tiers and the 400,000 beings in them, and I thought about resonance, and I thought about 200 years, and I thought about the difference between a floor that has been fixed and a building that has been carrying a problem for so long that the problem has become part of its structure. The VETH came out of the northern gate. 9 feet of engineered lethality, 4 centuries of selective breeding expressed in a single body, a combat record the collar listed simply as undefeated. It moved with a precision I had not seen in any previous opponent. Not the Dreschval's casual confidence, not the Grellin's adaptive pattern reading. The VETH moved the way a well-designed system operates. No wasted motion, no hesitation, no improvisation, because improvisation implies uncertainty, and the VETH had not appeared to experience uncertainty. It looked at me. I looked at the northeastern corner. I spent the first 4 minutes of the fight moving. Not toward the VETH, not away from it, across the floor in a specific geometric pattern that was not about the floor at all. It was about position. I needed to be in the northeastern sector of the arena. I needed the VETH to follow me there. I needed it standing in that sector with its full body mass concentrated on the floor directly below the damaged column casing. The VETH followed. It did not rush. It had not rushed in 400 years of genetic programming. It tracked my movement with the patience of a system that had never once needed to hurry because nothing it had ever faced had given it a reason to. I reached the northeastern sector. I stopped moving. I turned to face it. The VETH paused. It was reassessing. A Tier 0 human who had been running had stopped and turned around. That was outside the pattern. The VETH spent approximately 2 seconds recalibrating. I used those 2 seconds. I screamed. Not in fear, not in anger. In frequency, a sustained, directed vocalization, as loud as my lungs could produce, aimed at the northeastern wall, at the column casing 200 years old with 3 monitored but stable microfractures in its crystalline silicate compound. 400,000 spectators who had been watching a Tier 0 human fight the undefeated champion of the Veth broadcast empire, and who had been generating sustained, excited vibration for the better part of 4 minutes, heard me scream. They responded. 400,000 beings stamping, striking, generating resonance that moved through the grand arena's 30-meter tiered seating structure in a wave. Down through the original masonry, through the 200-year-old expansion columns, through the secondary casing with its crystalline silicate compound and its 3 monitored but stable microfractures. The northeastern wall produced a sound I had no name for. Not a collapse, not a dramatic structural failure, a crack, sharp and deep, the sound of a crystalline matrix expressing 200 years of accumulated stress in a single instant, followed by a section of the second-tier retaining ledge dropping 3 inches along the northeastern wall. The floor tilted. 3 degrees, less than 3, imperceptible to anyone who had not spent 4 months learning what a floor does in the seconds before it speaks. The Veth was mid-lunge. 9 feet. Approximately 600 kilograms, moving at full acceleration toward a target that was no longer standing where the calculation said it would be, because I had moved left the moment the crack sounded, already inside the arc of its strike, already driving forward and low with my full weight behind my shoulder. 60 kilograms directed at the precise mechanical joint, where the Veth's forward momentum was already unbalanced by 3 degrees of floor tilt, is not 60 kilograms. It is a lever. The Veth went down. The sound it made hitting the floor bypassed the collar entirely. I was standing over it before the crowd found its voice. In the crack that had broken from the retaining ledge, a section of the floor panel edge had fractured upward. A 3-inch shard of reinforced Keth composite, broken free by the vibration event, lying 2 feet from my right hand. I picked it up. I held it to the base of the Veth's neck. 400,000 beings. Quiet as a floor before it breaks. I know what that sounds like. The Veth was alive. It was still. Its eyes were open, and it was looking at me with an expression that the collar, for the first time since my capture, could not render in any available language. I did not use the shard. I held it for 6 seconds, long enough for every camera in the grand arena to capture it, long enough for 12 billion viewers across 40 systems to understand what they were seeing. Then I set it down on the floor. I stepped back. I looked at the northeastern wall. The crack line, the 3-inch drop, the dust still settling from 200 years of accumulated stress finally finding its release point. Danny, I thought. He would have called that a stress fracture. He would have been right. They gave me my multi-tool back 3 days after the grand arena match. It was sitting on the table in the neutral room when the guard brought me in. Sitting there as though it had always been there, as though my noticing it was the odd thing. I picked it up. The scratch on the handle caught the light. They thought this was a gesture of goodwill. It was a gesture, just not the one they intended. The Veth Broadcast Council had been in continuous session since the match. Claire had been tracking the administrative signal traffic through the cell block relay system, which the Veth had never bothered to secure against a tapping code, developed quietly over 4 weeks by a woman in a 3-meter cell who had nothing to do but pay attention. The council was not discussing what had happened in the arena. They were discussing what had happened in the northeastern wall. A section of the grand arena's retaining structure, standing for 200 years, through 37 undefeated champions, through the expansion of the Veth broadcasting empire across 3 star systems, had cracked during a match. It had cracked because a human woman with no weapon had screamed at the right frequency, while 400,000 spectators added their own resonance to a building that had been accumulating stress since before most of the current Veth administration had been born. The engineering assessment team had filed their report. The report described what I had done as exploitable architectural vulnerability. Not combat, not weapon deployment, not threat assessment. Architecture. I sat in the neutral room and waited for the arena director. He came in without preamble. "You did not use the shard," he said. "No," I said. "You had the match concluded. You chose not to end it." "I chose not to kill it," I said. "There is a difference." He sat down. He was quiet for a moment in the way that beings with significant power are quiet when they are recalibrating something fundamental. "What do you want?" he said. I told him. Not freedom, not as a first move. What I wanted was access. Every cell block in every Veth arena across all 3 systems. 1 hour per block, twice per week. And the architectural schematics of every facility in the system. Standard intake documentation. The kind any fighter was entitled to request as part of pre-match preparation. He studied me. "You want to teach," he said. "Yes. You want to teach every prisoner in the Veth system what you did to my arena." "I want to teach them to read the room they are already in," I said. He was quiet for a long time. "And if I refuse?" I looked at the table. Keth composite surface. I had found the resonance node in it 20 minutes ago. I looked at the arena director and said nothing. He approved the access that afternoon. I started with Claire's block. Claire had already done most of the work. She had taken everything I taught her and built a curriculum of her own, simpler and more practical than mine, stripped of the engineering theory and focused entirely on what to do with your feet and hands in the first 2 minutes of an unfamiliar space. She could teach a being with no technical background to read a floor in 2 sessions. In 4 sessions, she could have them finding resonance nodes in materials they had never encountered before. Claire was a better teacher than me. I had told her this once. She had given me a look that said she had known it for a while. I moved through the cell blocks. Every species was different. Every block had different construction, different materials, different acoustic properties. The lessons were never the same twice, because the environment was never the same twice. That was, I realized, the entire point. I was not teaching a technique. I was teaching a way of paying attention. In the second week, I reached Brackett's block. Brackett had been watching the relay screens during every match. I knew this because the tapping code told me. We had been communicating across corridor systems since the first days on the barge, and the code had grown more complex over the weeks. Brackett had added extensions to it, grammatical structures I had not built. It had been developing the language on its own. I stood outside its cell. Brackett looked at me with its 4 front-facing sensory organs, and I looked at its posture, the same load bracket geometry I had noticed on the very first night. "You already know how to distribute your weight," I said. It tapped the wall, the pattern from the first night on the barge, the one it had offered before we had any shared vocabulary at all. It meant yes, I have always known. I did not know what it meant. I thought about that for a long time. Every being in every cell block of every Veth arena was already carrying knowledge of their own environment, their own body, their own material reality. Knowledge they had never been asked to use as anything except a survival reflex. I had walked in thinking I was going to teach them to read floors. They had been reading floors their whole lives. I was just giving them permission to use it. In the third week, I reached a sector on the upper deck housing fighters from 3 species I had not encountered. One of them, a being I will call Nora because she had a quality of focused patience that reminded me of a woman named Nora who had been my structural mechanics professor, did not communicate through sound or tapping. She communicated through pressure, varying strengths and rhythms applied against a surface. I spent the first hour learning her system instead of teaching mine. By the end of the second hour, we had something workable. By the end of the third hour, Nora had found 17 structural irregularities in the cell block walls that I had not found in 40 minutes of my own assessment. She had not been trained, she had been paying attention. The arena director called me back to the neutral room in the fourth week. "The match results are changing," he said. "Yes," I said. "Tier 0 fighters are winning at a rate our classification system cannot account for." "Your classification system rates physical capability and weapon compatibility," I said. "It does not have a category for applied observation." He looked at me for a moment. "That is a very precise description," he said, "of what you are doing to my business model." "I am a structural engineer," I said. "I describe things accurately." He was quiet. "My engineers," he said, "have reviewed the Grand Arena structural assessment. The northeastern column casing requires full replacement. The projected cost is significant." A pause. "They also found 14 additional stress accumulation points in the original masonry that had not been previously flagged." "I know," I said. "I marked them in the schematics." He stared at me. "In red," I said. "Standard notation for load-bearing nodes under stress. It is in the documentation I filed as part of my pre-match preparation materials. Your engineering team was entitled to review all pre-match preparation documentation at any time." Another silence. "You filed a structural assessment of my arena as pre-match preparation materials." "It is standard intake documentation," I said. He leaned back. "You are," he said slowly, "the most expensive Tier 0 acquisition in the history of this program." "I know," I said. I looked at the table between us and thought about the multi-tool in my pocket, the scratch on the handle, the 6 years of work it represented. I thought about what I actually wanted. Not the access, though I had that. Not the schematics, though I had those. Not the matches, not the broadcast metrics, not the contract he was going to offer again. I wanted to go home. But home was not the first move. The first move was what I had already made. That evening, I distributed the updated schematics. Not just the Grand Arena, all 17 facilities. The full architectural documentation package the arena director had provided in good faith as standard fighter intake materials. The documents every fighter in the system was entitled to request. I distributed them through the cell block relay system, using the tapping code that Claire had developed, and that 11 other prisoners across 4 blocks had been extending and improving for 4 weeks. Each document arrived with one annotation applied to whatever structural diagram was most relevant to the facility being reviewed. Load-bearing nodes marked in red. That was all. No instructions, no plan, no speech. Every floor tells you how it wants to break. I was trusting them to listen. The next 3 weeks moved in a way I did not entirely track. Claire followed most of it through signal traffic and reported through the wall. Match results across all 17 arenas continued producing outcomes the VETH classification system could not account for. The arena director's emergency sessions continued. The structural assessment teams continued finding stress accumulation points that had been logged as monitored but stable for decades, for centuries. A legal challenge was filed. Claire translated the essence of it. Several captured fighter species were arguing that their detention and arena participation violated multiple provisions of the inter-system, agreements the VETH Corps had signed over the previous century. The argument was detailed. The supporting documentation included, among other materials, the structural assessment I had filed as pre-match preparation for the Grand Arena. I had not written the legal challenge. I had not been consulted about the legal challenge. I had given a precise map of every load-bearing point in every VETH facility in the system to 40,000 people who were highly motivated to find where things would give way. The arena director called me to the neutral room one more time. He looked, for the first time since I had met him, like something that had been carrying more load than it was rated for. "I have a proposal," he said. "I have one too," I said. I did not let him go first. I told him what I wanted, not just for me. Claire, Brackett, Nora, Penn, every being I had taught across the weeks of access he had granted me. Release orders, transport to the nearest neutral station, and formal documentation acknowledging that the VETH Core Arena program's detention methodology was under legal review. He looked at me for a long time. "You walked into my arena with no weapon," he said. "Yes," I said. "And you have spent the past several weeks systematically mapping every structural vulnerability in my organization. I have spent the past several weeks teaching people to read the room they are already in," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "Then your proposal." He slid a document across the Keth composite table. I found the resonance node in the table's surface before I read the first line. "Old habit." I read it. It was not everything I had asked for. It was a starting point. Provisional release orders for the beings I had specifically named, formal acknowledgement of the legal review process, transport arrangements. A load-bearing node. Everything else could be built on top of it. I picked up my multi-tool. I signed the document. That night in the cell block for the last time, I pressed my palm flat against the floor grating. The same aluminum alloy, the same crosshatch pattern I had first mapped on the intake barge. The fasteners on the left side were still spaced 9 inches apart. Still wrong. Still the kind of design flaw that looks like nothing until it becomes everything. I filed a maintenance report before I left. 3 lines, 2 bolts, 1 hour of work. I filed it the same way I had been filing things since the first day, because that is what you do when you see a problem. You do not wait for it to become catastrophic. You do not accept monitored but stable as a permanent condition. You write it down and you fix it and you move on. Claire tapped the wall one last time before the transport. The pattern was short, 1 sequence repeated twice. It meant thank you. I tapped back. The pattern meant load-bearing, which meant you were always the thing that held this up. Which was true. She had built the language that reached every cell block. She had built the curriculum that translated technical knowledge into something 40,000 beings could use. She had tracked the signal traffic that fed the legal challenge. She had done all of this from inside a polymer-walled cell 3 meters by 4. She had read the room she was already in. That was all I had ever taught anyone. On the transport, I sat with my multi-tool in my hand and watched the VETH station grow smaller through the viewport. The scratch on the handle caught the light. The same scratch. 6 years of deep space contracts, tunnel collapses, unseized valves, and one afternoon when a force response coordinator named Owen showed me how to use a body as a lever rather than a battering ram. Because the difference between those two things is the difference between force and physics does not care how big you are. I thought about Danny. He had worked that floor in Gary for 3 years before it dropped. He had known something was wrong. He had said so. The foreman had filed it as monitored but stable. 2 bolts, 1 hour of work. I pressed my palm flat against the transport floor. Cold metal, standard construction, fastener spacing even on all 4 sides. Good floor. Danny, I thought, this one is solid. I put the multi-tool back in my pocket. Outside the viewport, the VETH station was a point of light in the dark, smaller, then just another star among all the other stars. Every floor tells you how it wants to break. You just have to stop being too scared to listen. Danny taught me that. I was just passing it on. The Veth called me the floor eater. I never corrected them. But that is not what I am. I am a structural engineer. There is a difference. The floor breaks where I tell it to.